Welcome to the Successful Nonprofits Podcast. I'm your host, Dolph Goldenberg. Friends, we're going to have a great conversation today. It's going to be about the power of a strategic plan, and we are going to have it with someone who I have known. When I was prepping for this, I actually had to think back. I think I've known about a decade, maybe a little bit longer. And so that's Denise Spivak. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Centerlink, which is frankly more than just a national association for LGBTQ plus centers. It is a lifeline and incredible support for leaders of centers of LGBTQ plus organizations all across the country. And let me just share with you, Centerlink is doing especially important work with those organizations outside of maybe the big 5 or 6 most populated cities in the United States. And so I'm so excited to have Denise come on. And let me just share a little bit about Denise with you. So she's currently on her 4th career. Her 4th career is as a nonprofit leader and, by her own admission, a nonprofit nerd. Before becoming a nonprofit, first came to work in the nonprofit sector, then was a deputy director and then a CEO. Before joining the nonprofit sector, she was a broadcaster with Voice of America. She was in retail management, and she also was a search consultant and did executive search. So she's had a variety of careers. And as I said, I've known her really since she came to Centerlink about a decade or so ago. And I was also honored when Centerlink turned to me in 2018 and asked to help facilitate their strategic plan. And one of the reasons I really felt honored by that is because Centerlink does a lot of strategic planning projects for their own member organizations. Denise, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dolph. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Well, let me just start by saying that, as I've already said, I know you personally have a lot of strategic planning experience as a facilitator as well, because you're often working with member centers. What are some ways that the planning process really focuses leaders?
You know, I try and frame this for both leaders of centers who are the employees, so the executive directors or CEOs, and the board members. And it's like, look, your vision is the endpoint on that map, and your mission is kind of like your car, but the strategic plan is your map. So without it, you might have a mission, so you're all getting in the car, but then you're just sitting there going, where are we going? And again, you might have a vision, but you don't know how you're going to get there. So to me, the strategic plan is that really core roadmap that you need to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. And I really love the metaphor of like, okay, you're just sitting in the car. It's kind of like just sitting in your driveway being like, all right, we're going to go to California one day.
Yep.
Don't know how, but we're going to go.
Right. Exactly. And then each of those elements on the strategic plan is like your gasoline, right? I mean, it just keeps you on track. It keeps you on course. And I struggle to see, and I see the struggle when there isn't a strategic plan or any sort of plan in place to help guide an organization to reaching their vision and to achieving their mission.
Yeah. Hey, and I'll say, I mean, like, I think that word guide is also what's so critical, because I know often as we're finishing up strategic plans, we end up having conversations with organizations where we'll say, think of your strategic plan as a living document. You probably don't want to blow it up every year, but this is a guide. If you find you're falling behind, okay, that's just a sign you need to figure out what you're going to do to either catch up or rethink about what you can actually get done in a year or 2 years or 5 years.
Right. Right. And, it's interesting, Dolph, because I often quote you when you were helping us with one of our boot camps, you had said with the vision, right, that it's like the movies when that guy comes on and says, in a world. So that's a vision really is kind of a long way off. And so for most of us through our career with an organization, that strategic plan is never done. I hear people saying, well, we're finished with this strategic plan. And I'm like, no, you're not. Like it's that living, breathing thing that is your constant guide. And then ultimately, great. Hope you put yourself out of business. You've achieved your mission. You've made the world a better place. That's awesome. But in the interim, like, it's just a vital tool.
Right, right. Although, I will also say, it's funny when we say, hope you put yourself out of business, because certainly within the LGBTQ plus community, there's a famous instance of an organization deciding they've achieved their mission, closing up shop, and then later regretting it. And that's in New York State, where the Empire State Pride agenda, the old equality organization for New York, after marriage became a reality, they said, well, we're in New York. Everything's great and perfect in New York. So in 2015, they said, we're done. They closed up shop. And then 2016 happened.
Yep. Yep, it's true, and you continue to see it, um, and sometimes it's funder based, sometimes it's organizationally based or board based, but um, I often have to really question those organizations that have fulfilled their mission. I mean, when you look at organizations like United Way and Boys and Girls Clubs, and we got a lot of nonprofits in the world with almost decades, or almost like a century of existence, and they still haven't fulfilled their mission. So I really have to wonder on in a lot of cases.
Right. And I will also say, I mean, this is where I think strategic planning comes in as well. There's the famous case study, the March of Dimes, which
Hmm.
was founded to end polio in the United States among children. And, well, after the vaccine, and let's hope it does not come back. It might, but, let's hope it does not. They were like, okay, well, we've ended polio. What are we going to do next? And so then, they decided what they were going to work on next and said, this is what we're going to tackle. And they actually decided to tackle something much more ambitious that they've not yet achieved. But, they were kind of like, we've built this infrastructure. So now let's do some planning and figure out how we can use this infrastructure in a way that's close to what our original mission is.
Exactly, and I bet that involved a strategic plan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I feel pretty confident they were like, okay, how are we going to do this?
Yep, exactly.
So when one of your member organizations reaches out to you about strategic planning, what are some things that you do to kind of just make sure they're ready to plan?
Well, you know what's interesting, Dolph? I mean, we deal with organizations from like really nascent startups to, I mean, hi, we just got together and want to start a center, all the way to the Los Angeles LGBT Center, that's the largest LGBT organization in the world, over 5 decades of existence. So it's a big span of organizations, but where we spend a lot of our time is with small and medium organizations. And what we find a lot of times is they want a plan and they think that they're ready to do a strategic plan, and they're really not. Because I think a lot of people don't fully understand what a full blown strategic plan is. And as a result, we try and talk them through it and say, you need a plan. We're not disputing that in the least, and we totally want to help you with that. And so maybe it's a bridge plan for an organization that's gone through a lot of tumultuous times or a lot of change, and they've got a brand new board and a brand new leader or an interim leader. Doing a strategic plan might not be the best idea at that particular point. So maybe it's a bridge plan to get them from point A to point B. Maybe it's strategic visioning. So maybe that's where they want to go, get that strategic visioning in place, and then have a short-term plan to kind of get to the point where they're ready to do that full-blown strategic plan. So it really is a lot of Q&A, a lot of understanding where the organization is, what work they've done in the past together, because a good strategic plan is about a lot of working with each other and respecting each other and each other's ideas and being willing to broaden your thoughts. And if you don't have that sort of communication and trust within the organization established, it's hard to establish it during a strategic plan, right? Hopefully you'll strengthen it, but to establish it's hard. So I think it's really about where they are in their life cycle, where they are in terms of just their sort of ethos, if you will, or their being, and then what is it that they really need? What strategic element do they need? If it's that full-blown strategic plan, great. That takes a lot longer. If they're looking for something immediate, then maybe we're going to look at sort of a strategic bridge plan, strategic visioning, something where it's a little less intense, but still is kind of coming out with that same product, which is that plan, right? That plan of what they're going to do, whether it's for a year, 6 months, whatever that time is to carry them over to get to that next point. So that's where we spend a lot of time.
So I love where you're going with that. I will share with you that on many occasions I've said to an organization, yeah, you're not ready for a full strategic plan, whatever transitional issues, whatever's going on. But I've referred to it as a tactical plan, not a bridge plan. I love this concept of a bridge plan because it gets you somewhere else.
It's carrying you over, right? That sort of shark infested water. That's
Yes.
how I've always viewed it. That it's that bridge that's going to get you over the sharks, uh, to that next piece of land where hopefully you're ready. And again, still may not be ready for that full blown plan, but maybe now we're ready for a little bit more intense plan to get you to that next point where maybe now we're ready. And maybe that's part of the plan, right? Is that you're getting yourself ready for the strategic plan. So that's kind of where that phrase came in for us.
And so I'm just curious, did you all come up with that phrase? Did Did you run across it somewhere? Because again, I love that, the bridge plan idea.
I don't know. I honestly, I don't know where it came from. I don't know if one of my old CEOs used it. I don't know if it just sort of came up because I
Mhm.
had no other word to use at the time. I don't remember, but it's just sort of where we ended up.
I mean, the other thing I really like about that concept of a bridge plan is that, yeah, you're probably not going to get the same stakeholder feedback and input that you would in a full strategic plan. But all you're trying to do is figure out how are we going to get past where we're at right now, this crisis, so that we can do something else in the future. And so that is really where you kind of just probably need some, as you said, strategic visioning, but also just, some expertise around, okay, organizations that experience this type of an issue can do the following things to move themselves forward. Which of these things do you want to do?
Right. Exactly. And I can pretty confidently say most of the times it's around fundraising. It's around financial management. It's around getting a board together, like a solid board, not just people that are willing and breathing, right? But people who actually maybe we're being a little more strategic about who we're bringing on the board, and or we're going to review our programming. Is this really what we need to be doing? It also depends on, have you gone through crisis? Have you lost the community's trust? If so, then maybe it's about communication. So there's a lot of elements that come into play. Your question was, what are you talking about with centers when they come to you? And that's a lot of it is, where are you internally and externally with your community? And so what do we need to focus on and get your organization focused on that is going to help you get out of the quicksand?
I love that. That's truly incredible. And so I'm curious now, when you're working with an organization with a center to do more of a full planning process, what are some ways they benefit that maybe they were not expecting? So obviously they're expecting a plan, right? But what other things do they often end up getting or benefiting from?
I think a lot of it is the camaraderie, the thinking at a strategic level. And this is what I see a lot of boards don't get to do. They don't get to spend the time thinking at that strategic level. And again, for a little more advanced organizations, this is where we try and get them, because really that's what the board should be doing, right? They should be thinking at that strategic level. But those aren't the conversations they're having. They're focusing on the finance reports and the gala that's coming up, and they're getting involved in the minutia. And the strategic plan allows them to do a little bit of that, but then take it to that strategic level and start thinking that way. So, the things I'll usually hear is, this really gave us a chance to come together as a group and talk about things that we don't usually talk about, which is frightening. Don't get me wrong. It's frightening they don't talk about these things, but at least now they've started. And they've recognized the things that they need to be talking about. So there's that, and I think it's that unified vision, because with board members, with rotation, people come in at different times. So when that group has all come together and agreed on a plan, and they're all moving in the same direction, it's their chance to actually be unified in that movement that they all came up with. Nobody else, they didn't just come in, get handed a book and be told this is where we're going. You actually had a hand in putting that together. So it's the ownership, it's the buy-in, it's a camaraderie. And I think those are the things that really help.
And in most planning processes, you've got like a committee or work group of board members. So it's not the full board doing all the work.
Right.
But it's been my experience also that those work group members are the people who suddenly understand the organization better than any other board member.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like these are the ones who suddenly are like, oh yeah, I talked to a funder, or I talked to clients, or, in reviewing financials, I'm not a finance person, but in reviewing the financials, I learned the following things about this organization. And they bring that with them for the next couple of years to board meetings.
Absolutely. And stakeholders, hearing from the clients and the people in the community, the impact that the organization has had, that a lot of times as CEOs and executive directors, maybe we don't do a great job of communicating that feedback. So to have them hear that, it gives them a sense of pride that they didn't have before. So I agree with you, all the things that you said. And I think also community stakeholder impact is really big.
Yeah. And along those lines, and this also is a, equity and inclusion issue. About maybe 3 years or so ago, one of the things that Lexi and I learned is that we have to do staff focus groups with every strategic plan that we do. And we actually have gotten some pushback from some frankly progressive organizations who are like, oh, we don't think it's that important. And yeah, and I'll share with you, we had one group that convinced us it was not necessary. And we'll never, ever, ever, ever be convinced again that it's not necessary. Because, when it came time for the plan to actually roll out, staff were like, well, wait a minute. Senior leadership was involved, but not the staff actually doing the work. And, just to know that you've been heard and see your voice in the plan somewhere is really important. And so, like Lex and I, when we walked away from that one, we're like, our lesson learned is never again. If someone says, no, don't talk to staff, we'll be like, well, yeah, we're not for you. We're not the right consultants.
Yeah. Yeah. I think sometimes that's born out of ignorance. Other times I think they take that staff board split to a degree that really harms the strategic plan, because it's really a misunderstanding about that whole, staff and board shouldn't be working together,
Yeah. Yeah.
on day-to-day things. Well, yeah, but I think this is the one exception where they need to really hear from the staff about what that day-to-day thing is that they might not be aware of. So
yeah. And I'll also share with you, I mean, this certainly has been our experience that for the most part, it's not the board that's doing the focus group. So like if you bring consultants in, it'll be your consultants. So there's still a little bit of a wall, between the staff and the board. So it does get filtered, and yeah, that does mean then it gets filtered through consultants, and we're subjective as well, but it still gets filtered. So it's not the raw, oh my gosh, this one person's really, really angry with the executive director, and that's all they're going to talk about is how angry they are with the executive director. Okay, yeah, I could see why maybe that might not be what you want. You want board members to be exposed to. But as consultants, we can kind of look at that and go, okay, what's the underlying issue? And then how do we present this in a way that it's supportive of the organization and leadership and not detrimental to?
yeah, and you would think, because I do serve as a board member on a center, right? I'd want to hear those things, because if you're not willing to hear them when they're offered to you, 10 to 1, you're going to be hiring a consultant later on down the line because now you have to. And it's kind of a bonus that comes out of the strategic planning process, I would say.
Yeah, I will also share with you one of the things I've loved about when we've done the staff focus groups is staff in the groups, because again, we don't do them one-on-one. They're, a typical breakup. If an organization has 50 staff, we'll probably do 6 groups or 7 groups. So and staff are also interacting with each other as part of this focus group. And so there's this one really memorable moment in a focus group where, so someone had said, we'd like to get more acknowledgement and recognition from management for the work that we do. So I go, what does this look like for you? One person's like, a pizza party would be nice. And then someone else says, if I have to go to a pizza party, I'm going to quit. Well, but what I loved about that is now staff were hearing, oh, okay, just because pizza party is what I want doesn't mean that's what everybody wants. And so maybe it can't be a one size fits all. And I loved that staff then got to kind of experience that and go, oh, this is why recognition can be so hard.
I love it. That's great. That's a great story.
And so as you start to prepare for your board retreat, what are some of the things you're thinking about in order to have a retreat that's really impactful?
Well, first of all, I think you need to get an outside facilitator. It doesn't work if it's the ED or the board chair running it, because they don't get to participate. And a successful retreat is really giving everybody a chance to participate. So I think making sure that you've factored in that cost and factored in that person is really important. And then, you want to get the right person, the person that's going to gel, that's going to be able to handle multiple personalities and potential conflict, and start that in advance. Get that right person, have an agenda, have a plan, but also, leave time for the unknown. Things come up during strategic plans, things come up during retreats that you might not have even considered, that all of a sudden might be a big aha moment for everybody in the room. And you don't want to be on such a tight timetable that you can't explore those things. I talked earlier about that openness to new ideas. And so if that truly is going to be part of this whole planning process, then you have to allow time for it. So I think that's really important. And then just making sure that everybody, look, I'm not a tremendous fan of like group agreements. I'm just not personally, but I think they're important because some people need them. And so having those group agreements that are going to allow for that, and making sure that that facilitator is able to help the group move towards an agreed upon goal, and that everybody everybody's open and willing and comes ready to participate. I can't tell you how many times we've done this, and it's like, oh, by the way, James can't come. Well, why? Like there's got to be that commitment. There's got to be that investment in the organization. So really making this that thing that people want to come to, and that they do come to, and that everybody participates, because that one person who doesn't participate is now kind of like behind the group. They're not in that group, and that makes it really difficult. So those are kind of my main things that I hope for.
And I'll share with you in my experience that one person who does not participate, when as part of the planning process, we also look at board attendance. That's often your chronically absent board member, or it's your board member who only shows up by Zoom. And it's really when it's not a remote retreat, it's really tough to be the only person on Zoom in a retreat. It's really tough.
Yep, it is. It is very tough. And then there's the question: well, will you record it? No, like it's got to be that comfortable space where people can say what they want without fear that's going to be recorded and live in posterity.
Right.
I mean, and so for that reason, I don't like having a person attend by Zoom, or anybody. I mean, now that we're out of the Zoom time of our lives, we can do away with that element of it when it comes to these sorts of gatherings, because there is something about being together in person, about taking the lunch break together and breaking bread together. And, it creates a whole different atmosphere and just ecosystem for the board and the staff to work together. So
yeah, absolutely. And I will also say, recording the entire retreat, who's really going to go back and watch a 7-hour recording? No one.
Right.
No one.
Yep. Except if somebody said something, and then they'll go back to find it. But
yeah, exactly. Like, something happened in the third hour. Let me go find that. I'm going to clip that now. No, I'm right. I am right there with you. That's how they'll do it. But they're not going to do it for anything that's useful or productive for the board. They're going to do it for something that's not productive.
100% agree.
One of the other things you said, and this has been one of, frankly, one of my key learnings as a consultant, is also making that space for the unknown. Just knowing that, okay, if you have a 7-hour retreat, you can't plan 6 hours and 55 minutes. There's going to be something that comes up, or a conversation that needs to take 30 minutes more than you thought it was going to take.
Yep, it's inevitable.
Yeah,
and it's Murphy's Law too. It is Murphy's Law. If you allow time for it, it may not happen. But if you don't allow time for it, it definitely will.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, I will share with you one of the interesting tricks that I've kind of learned over the last few years, is especially when we're at an impasse, is to say, okay, can we get a small group that's going to work on this later? And, and make sure we get multiple voices. So it's not just, okay, group that wants A and now group that wants B. But can we get a small group? Can we get 2, 3, 4 people to work on this and bring it back? And then they work through it. And this is especially true like when organizations get stuck around their mission, because 15 people can't write a mission statement.
Right.
They can't.
Right. So I think this is where really the split happens between the small organization and the larger organization.
Yeah.
Because I've worked with the small organizations where I have stopped the whole process because they couldn't come up with a vision. And I gave them overnight. We came back the second day and I said, okay, we are not moving forward, because if you all can't decide where you're going, like none of this matters.
Yeah.
None of this is going to make any sense, because you're not leading to any, like you said, sitting in the driveway going to California, right? You haven't even decided where you're going. So there's no way to plan what rest stop we're going to stop at if you don't even know what direction we're headed. And so with a small group, you can do that. With a larger group, again, now you got 15, 20 people trying to create something. So I think that's where, with the larger groups, that small strategic planning, smaller committee that's going to do a lot of that work in advance and kind of get those things, so that then it's just presenting it to the board for, maybe any minor suggestions or tweaks, but basically it's just for approval. And now we can move on to the bigger planning. So I think a lot of this depends on the size of your organization, where you are in your growth life cycle. It's so different. And that's something I had to learn coming in. As you mentioned, nonprofit was my fourth career. I was used to some corporate stuff, and it just kind of was what it was, and you moved on, and that it was all decided for you. So it's really learning the nuances of the really small organization, the medium size, and the larger ones, and how those all work very different.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will also say, obviously, size does not necessarily imply where an organization is in its life cycle, but along those lines, also like where it is in the life cycle. Is it a startup? Is it, been going really well and but not growing? Or, has it just had an incredibly amazing growth spurt?
Right, exactly. And with all of those, it's so different.
Yeah. Oh
It's so
yeah.
different.
Yes. So Denise, you mentioned just as I did that you've had 4 careers. And so this makes me think of the off the map question. So you've had 4 careers. And by the way, again, I've known you for about a decade, maybe longer. I was blown away. I did not, until I was doing the research for this, I didn't realize you're a great grandparent. Like, oh my gosh. Like, yeah, yes. I was like, wow. But so you've had 4 careers. What line runs through them all?
People, you know, I was a psychology major, and it's really funny because I was very fortunate and blessed and privileged, that I was in a position where my father, who had not come from that background, had made a commitment that he was going to send his kid to college, and
Hmm.
and so he did, and my college was paid for, and I didn't have to worry about that, and that was, I acknowledge that's a place where a lot of people aren't, but I came out with a psychology degree. And as I went into my fourth career, my father's like, and your psychology degree helped you how? Like, but it did, because what I learned through psychology about relating to people and how people relate to each other, and that has run through everything I've done, whether it's how do you communicate something to people when they can't see you? How do you communicate something to people when they can see you? It's something they don't want to hear. So it's about people and the just the whole way of communication. So I could say people, and I could also say communication, because it really is both. But two things that really I've spent a lifetime on and really love. And if you indulge me for just a moment, I will tell you, though, in my senior year, I went to a nonprofit job fair with one of my close friends, in DC, and Ralph Nader was the keynote speaker. For those of us of a certain age who remember Ralph Nader, and we both got on the metro afterwards and looked at each other, and I said, "Oh my God, that was the most depressing thing I've ever been to. I will never ever work in nonprofit." And here I am. So I think nonprofits come a long way, but I think it's still, with most nonprofit organizations, it's about people and communication and helping people, and that's it.
And I feel terrible that Ralph Nader was such a bad keynote speaker. Like, that's just depressing. I can't.
Well, I can't say that Ralph was bad. I can just say he didn't dig it out of where we were at that point. So,
Wow. That's
but I think,
awesome.
that was the late '80s.
Yeah.
It was just a time where there was a lot of not great stuff happening, and I think that was reflected in sort of where the nonprofits were. It was a tough time. So,
Yeah. And admittedly, the nonprofit sector was in a really unique and unusual transition. It was professionalizing in the 80s.
yep,
Yeah.
yep. But a lot of it was just about misery and gloom, and it was not what a young college graduate wanted to hear. So.
So that's all. So instead, you went to Voice of America. You're like, all right, I'll go be a broadcaster.
Exactly. I love broadcasting. It's where my heart was, and in some ways always will be. But again, it depends how you look at what you're doing. But to me, that was always a vehicle of helping people and communicating with them, and for some, even if it's that one person who had the radio on and was having a horrible day, and maybe you brought a smile to their face because you said the right thing or you played the right song. That to me was how I could sort of go home feeling good that day. And that carried over into retail.
Hmm.
That carried over into executive recruiting, where maybe I could change somebody's life by getting them the job they always wanted, or that was going to change their life. So there's that's what carries through, is how can you best help people to do what they want to do, to achieve what they want to achieve, to be what they want to be. So
I love, well, what an amazing line to have run through your entire career. That's
it's
awesome.
I've been very fortunate. I really have.
Well, Denise, thank you so much for coming on. I am so grateful that you did. Again, you are a subject matter expert in strategic planning, and through your work and through Centerlink, you have helped so many organizations, not just with planning but with leadership development as well. And so I'm grateful for the work you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dolphin. Thank you for being there, because there's a number of times we can't do it and we need somebody to turn to, and you're there. And so you continue to be from your time being an executive director and continuing to work with us at Centerlink. Just a great resource and friend, and I really appreciate having you.
Well, thank you. And listeners, if you want to know how to get a hold of Denise or you want to learn more about Centerlink, go to lgbtcenters.org. I also just want to share with you that there is a biennial. I think that means once every other year. But so every other year, there's an incredible State of the Centers report. And if you are an LGBTQ plus center, you definitely want to go to lgbtcenters.org and download that report. If you want to see how you benchmark against all of the other centers around the country, this is the report for you. And before we got on, Denise and I, really before we started recording, Denise and I were talking about it. And I said that one of the things I always love to do with that report when I'm doing an interim at an LGBT center is to essentially literally just print the report out and then write where this center is at and then send it to the board. So that way the board can look and go, oh my gosh, this is how we compare to all the other centers. These are some things we could be doing. These are some things we're doing really great. This is helpful. So please make sure you check out that report as well at lgbtcenters.org.
Yeah, the brand new 2022 one is going to be released this October. So we're really excited about it.
That's awesome. And I think this episode releases toward the end of October. So it's timely. I love that. That's great. Thank you. And listeners, if you found this conversation useful on strategic planning and you want more, there's 2 episodes I think you should consider. One is episode 213, The Magic of Strategic Plans with Leanna Downey. And the second episode to think about downloading and listening to is episode 261, Supercharge Your Strategic Plan with Rebecca Staple-Wax. That, listeners, is our show for this week. I hope that you have gained some insight to help your nonprofit thrive. And the lawyers make me say this, even though I don't think we talked about anything that was tax, legal, or accounting. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm also not an accountant. And neither I nor the Goldenberg Group provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. I say this all the time. If you need tax, legal, or accounting advice, don't get it from a podcast. Don't even get it from the internet. What you should do is find a licensed, qualified professional and have a conversation with them. If you're not sure what type of professional you should be having a conversation with, you could reach out to me. I'm happy to help you figure that piece out.